The U.S. debt has grown faster than the national income, which led to the authorization of borrowing by Congress through the Second Liberty Bond Act of 1917 and a general limit on the federal debt imposed in 1939. The U.S. government recently reached its borrowing limit, and the Treasury has taken extraordinary measures to meet its financial obligations. If Congress does not agree to raise the debt ceiling, the Treasury will be unable to pay the government's bills once its bank account at the Federal Reserve runs out. The extraordinary measures can only be expected to provide a few months of time before the Biden administration and lawmakers on Capitol Hill engage in a showdown. The debt limit does not allow for new government spending, but only enables the financing of past commitments that have been made by Congress and previous presidents. The Republicans in opposition may use the debt ceiling approval process to reduce future spending and borrowing. For instance, trying to reduce the spending involved in the recent Inflation Reduction Act. Janet Yellen, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, warned that a failure to meet the government's obligations would cause harm to the U.S. economy, American livelihoods, and global financial stability. The debt ceiling debate has happened several times before, and investors are used to the negotiation process. The debt ceiling has been increased 90 times in the 20th century. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content. The debt limit has been raised multiple times under different presidents, with 18 raises under Ronald Reagan, 8 under Bill Clinton, 7 under George W. Bush, and 5 under Barack Obama. When it seems like an agreement on the debt limit won't be reached, there are usually two proposed solutions to prevent default. One is the president using his 14th Amendment authority to pay the bills, and the other is the creation of a $1 trillion coin to refill the government's general account. A blogger and journalist recently suggested that the government could solve the problem by issuing premium bonds, but these solutions are considered questionable and desperate. The debate over the debt ceiling is not new and often ends with an agreement to raise the debt limit. This time, however, it is uncertain what will happen and what impact it might have on the markets. Concerns have arisen regarding the potential impact of the current debt ceiling debate on markets, as it seems to be more tumultuous than previous iterations in recent history. The election of Kevin McCarthy, the Republican House Majority Leader, was a source of drama as he became the first party leader in a century to fail to be elected as Speaker in the initial round of voting. It took him 15 rounds of voting over a period of 3 days to finally secure the position. This could be problematic for markets, as any controversial decision that needs to be made by the House could result in similar drama in the future. The issue is not necessarily a divide between Republicans and Democrats, but rather the possibility of a small group of rebels within the Republican Party obstructing the goals of the majority. The fear is that the U.S. may have a Congress that is unable to reach any agreement. Of course, there is a range of potential outcomes. The most benign outcome is that the debt ceiling debate causes fluctuations in the stock and bond markets, but eventually compromises are made and an agreement is reached. In recent history, during the 2013, 2018, and 2021 debt ceiling debates, the situation was resolved. However, in 2011, the disagreement caused the U.S. debt to be downgraded by ratings agencies, leading to a decline in the stock market of 11% over 2 weeks. On the day of the credit downgrade, the S&P 500 experienced one of its worst one-day drops in history, falling 6.7%, with all 500 stocks in all 10 industry groups declining. The U.S. Government Accountability Office estimates that the 2011 debt ceiling dispute resulted in a $1.3 billion increase in borrowing costs for the government that year. And the Bipartisan Policy Center's analysis showed that the argument resulted in a total of $18.9 billion in increased borrowing costs over the next decade. A more concerning outcome for some investors is that Congress could utilize the debt ceiling as leverage to force temporary or permanent cuts in government spending, which could negatively impact companies whose revenue largely depends on the federal government. The potential impact of reduced government spending on various industries is a concern for some investors. The defense sector, which has performed well in the past year, and infrastructure companies that benefit from Biden's Inflation Reduction Act may experience reduced earnings if spending cuts occur. However, this is not a definite outcome, as the budget cuts implemented in 2011, the Budget Control Act, were later reversed, with both parties blaming each other for the consequences. The most concerning scenario, although considered unlikely, is that the disagreement in Congress leads to a missed interest payment and a default. Some political analysts believe this to be a possibility, with Mark Zandi, the chief economist at Moody's, stating that some senators and congresspeople are openly considering a breach of the debt ceiling in the event of a default. This could be costly for the United States, as seen in 1979 when Congress raised the debt ceiling just before a potential default. Although, a failure in the 1970s error word processing equipment used to print checks caused a delay in payments to investors, but they were eventually received with only a small delay. In 1979, the TBI yields increased by 60 basis points in a day and stayed elevated for several months, causing tens of billions of dollars in expenses for taxpayers. The cause of the temporary default was a technological problem, not an unwillingness to pay, and the Treasury eventually paid the $120 million shortfall with a short delay, but was reluctant to pay additional interest for the period of delay. Despite some legal pressure and new legislation, the Treasury ultimately made all investors whole for the additional interest. Although this event in 1979 was considered a minor, unintentional default, it was still a costly mistake for the country. To avoid a repeat, the Treasury is taking extraordinary measures such as suspending new investments in various government accounts and making changes to the thrift savings plan for federal employees, which invests in non-marketable securities that mature every day. The Treasury Department may temporarily halt reinvestments, but these funds will eventually be reinstated once the debt ceiling issue is resolved. After those measures are exhausted, the Treasury may prioritize certain payments to maintain interest and principal payments on the government's debt and avoid default. This could impact programs such as federal salaries, Social Security, and military health care coverage. In the past, during partial government shutdowns, government employees have been forced to work without pay or sent home without pay, and government facilities, such as the National Park Service, have been shut down. Such a process of choosing which payments to make and when to make them would be costly and challenge the limits of the Treasury's financial technology systems. The current political situation regarding this issue appears promising, as Kevin McCarthy, the new Republican House Speaker, recently had a positive conversation with President Biden about working through these challenges. Although McCarthy holds a weak position within his own party, a rule was agreed upon that would allow any single lawmaker to motion to remove the Speaker from his post, making it difficult to push any compromise on rebellious party members. Regarding the proposed solutions such as minting $1 trillion platinum coin, this argument has been present since the Obama administration's debt ceiling struggles. In 1996, a modification of the Coinage Act was passed by Congress, granting the U.S. Treasury the authority to mint platinum coins of any value. Hence, a platinum coin does not need to contain $1 trillion worth of platinum, but could simply be given at face value. It has been argued that the Treasury could mint such a coin, deposit it at the Federal Reserve, and continue making payments without violating any statutes or provisions of the Constitution. Another argument is that the President could use the 14th Amendment to pay government bills, but former President Barack Obama was not persuaded by his lawyers that it was a winning argument. Finally, the high interest rate bond argument suggests that the Treasury could issue bonds with high interest rates to replace existing bonds. As the bonds expire, investors would have to be paid more than the face value of the bonds, resulting in an increase in the national debt by the face value of the bonds. The debt limit statute only applies to the face value of government obligations, not their actual value. The Biden administration has stated that they do not intend to take executive action without congressional intervention to avoid default. The use of these solutions would demonstrate the dysfunction in the U.S. government, but they may not be as severe as a default. Janet Yellen, in a letter, confirmed the breach of the debt ceiling and warned that the measures being taken to avoid default may not be sustainable for an indefinite amount of time. Yellen has previously stated that it is unlikely that the government will run out of cash before early June, but the timing of the potential default varies based on various factors, such as incoming tax receipts. Be sure to subscribe, and thanks for watching.